Alright, let's do this one last time. My name is not important, and for the last 15 months I've been the host of the one and only Rewind Reviews. During that time I've broken the multiverse, been poisoned by a spider, struck by lightning, I've put my name in the death note, not really advisable. I've also sat on my backside, and I sat on my backside again, and again, and again, and again. And I did this. I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. I don't really know why. Oh, hi Mark. Look, I've been reviewing films for a short while now, and there's one film that I've always wanted to do. So in this video, I finally decided to do it. So buckle up your seatbelts, we're diving head first into the Spider-Verse. Hello guys and welcome back to another Rewind review. In this video we're going to be taking a look at a movie that completely changed how animated movies are created, and that movie is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Released in 2018, teenager Miles Morales becomes the Spider-Man of his universe and must join with 5 spider-powered individuals from other dimensions to stop a threat for all realities. Based on the Marvel comic books, Into the Spider-Verse is directed by Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey and Rodney Rothman, and written by Phil Lord and Rodney Rothman. The movie features the voice talent of Shameik Moore, Jake Johnson, Haley Steinfeld, Mahershala Ali, Brian Terry Henry, Lily Tomlin, Zoe Kravitz, John Mulaney, Kimiko Glenn, Nicolas Cage, Catherine Hahn, Liev Schreiber and Luna Lauren Velez. Now I'm definitely not alone in saying that when this movie was initially announced, nobody really knew what to think of it. This was going to be the first feature-length animated Spider-Man movie, and it was going to be produced by Sony Pictures. And at this point in time, Sony Pictures didn't exactly have the best track record when it came to a lot of their own projects involving Spider-Man, because at this point in time, the Amazing Spider-Man franchise had come out. The first one, personally, I thought was really good, but the second one went a bit too far off the rails, to the point where Sony had to consider that the future of Spider-Man rested in the MCU, and Tom Holland had taken over as Spider-Man, and he was now the Spider-Man of the MCU. But Sony had been trying to forge ahead with their own shared universe featuring a lot of Spider-Man's characters, including a lot of the villains, which they have started doing now to varying degrees of success. And unfortunately, when it came to Amazing Spider-Man 2, one of the biggest things that did let that movie down was the fact that they were using that movie as a bit of a springboard for all these different spin-offs that they had planned at the time, like Sinister Six and Venom. And around this time we'd also had the big email leak as well, where Sony Pictures basically had all their plans for all these different spin-offs leaked over the internet, and my god, some of them were just horrific. And unfortunately what that showed is that a lot of the people who were working behind the scenes didn't really know what it was that they were doing, so we weren't exactly 100% sure what this new animated movie was really going to be like. But all that started to change when we started seeing trailers and a few bits of promotional footage for it, and we were seeing like this really strange looking animated movie that looks nothing like we'd ever seen before. And when it comes to me, my curiosity definitely did start to rise with this movie, and I definitely was a lot more interested in seeing what it was that they were going to be doing with it, because it just looks so different from any other animated movie that had ever been made at that point in time. And when Venom was released in 2018, they had a little scene from the movie in the post-credit sequence, and I think most people will agree that that was the best bit of the entire movie. And that scene is the thing that sold me going to see this movie in the first place. It did get my attention, it did make me think, okay, this looks like it's going to be really good and really interesting. I want to see this. The first time I saw this movie was actually on a preview day, so this was kind of just before the film was officially released. I definitely still had my reservations about what the movie was going to be like overall, but by the time I'd actually walked out of the cinema, there was only one question going through my head, and that was, had I just seen the best Spider-Man movie that has ever been made? And I've definitely given that some thought over the years, and my answer is yes. I absolutely love this movie. This is hands down not only the best Spider-Man movie, but it is one of the best comic book adaptations that has ever been made. I enjoyed it that much that honestly, when it comes to the movie being in the cinemas, this is one of the few movies that in recent times I have gone to go and see multiple times in the cinema and enjoyed it just as much each time. But just before I proceed any further, I do need to mention that I will be going over a few spoilery details, so this is your warning that if you have not seen Into the Spider-Verse, if you want to see it and you don't want to know anything about it, I would suggest watching the movie before seeing this review. So, when it comes to Into the Spider-Verse, one of the biggest shifts that this movie does compared to all the other big screen adaptations of Spider-Man over the years is that this movie shifts the focus onto a character called Miles Morales rather than Peter Parker. Miles has been around since 2011 in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, where he took over as the web slinger when Peter Parker is killed by the Green Goblin. He didn't exactly get the best reception when he was initially introduced, but over time he has slowly become a fan favourite variant experience of Spider-Man through the use of him in different mediums, the best of which being the PlayStation video games and this movie. I love how they handle Miles' story in this movie and how his origin story is told. Because yes, this is definitely an adaptation of his origin story from the comic books, with him taking over as the Spider-Man of that universe after Peter Parker is killed. But unlike the origin stories that are in all the other previous Spider-Man movies, this movie actually kind of takes Miles and puts him in a group setting, because one of the things that all the other movies did is they have Peter basically trying to discover his powers and what it is that he can do on his own, and he's completely isolated from everybody else. With this movie, one of the biggest changes that they do is that they introduce multiple different Spider-Men from different universes that all have a bit of an impact on him, and he's able to learn from them. And Miles as a character, how it is that he's been written, how it is that he's been performed by Shameik Moore, is brilliant. He's really likeable and he's really funny, and I think that he's really relatable as well. Spider-Man is one of the most relatable characters in Marvel Comics, and that is one of the reasons why people do tend to gravitate towards him, because he is somebody who goes through the experiences that the average person does, the pressures of high school, of having to balance life and responsibilities and all these other things as well, on top of him being a superhero. And how they establish him in this movie is really good. Not everybody will have gone through the same experiences that he will have done, but everybody can understand what it is that he's going through, and I think that how it's done, how they build the character up over the introduction of him, is fantastic. There is a lot of focus on anxiety and pressure that is put on Miles throughout this movie, and that's one of the key things that they do within the high school setting, is they do kind of firmly establish that there is definitely a lot of expectations and pressure when it comes to him. And then there's also the pressure of him becoming Spider-Man. He knows that he has a responsibility to finish what it is that Peter Parker started, and while that does weigh quite heavy on his shoulders, especially with the other Spider people piling the pressure on, the core of the movie focuses on his journey into becoming not only Spider-Man but his own Spider-Man, and it's done in the perfect way, with just the right amount of character development, world building, and how it ultimately gets paid off towards the end. But Miles isn't the only Spider-Man in this movie. As I said, this is a multiverse movie, so there are 5 other different Spider-Men and women that are introduced into this movie, and these include Peter B. Parker, Spider-Gwen, Penny Parker, Spider-Man Noir, and one of the best ones, Spider-Ham. When it comes to Spider-Ham, Spider-Noir and Penny Parker, those characters are more there just to kind of round out the lineup, but when it comes to Peter B. Parker and Spider-Gwen, those 2 characters have a bit more of an impact on the story and Miles. More so Peter B. Parker, who does actually have an arc throughout this movie. And it's a really great decision to really sort of take with this character, because it is so different from what we have seen before with the other versions of Spider-Man. He's much older than any other interpretation that we have seen before. He's been through so much more heartbreak over the years. He has gotten married to MJ, he's split up with MJ, he has buried Aunt May, he's made some dicey choices and invested in a spider-themed restaurant. It all went wrong, but he handled it like a champ. And it's a really great contrast to Miles' Peter, who is an uncredited Chris Pine, who has had a pretty perfect life from what it is that we tell, which is a really great early indicator that this is not going to be set within the universe that we are more familiar with. Because it is quite funny seeing that montage at the beginning with Miles' Peter Parker, where he's going over all the wonderful things that's happened to him in his life, and he's just like, this doesn't really feel like Spider-Man to me. And when Peter B. Parker is introduced later on, he gets his own little montage and you see all the stuff that he's gone through, and you're like, oh, this is the classic Peter Parker. I really love his character arc, and I love how it is that he fits into the overall story, because he is Miles' mentor in this. He's a bad mentor, absolutely, but he is there and he does offer help and guidance. And as for Spider-Gwen, I think that how they introduce her in the movie is actually quite a clever idea, because you do know who she is and you kind of know that they are going to give her a proper introduction a little bit later on, but it is quite a fun little introduction for her. She doesn't go through a character arc as such compared to what it is that Peter B. Parker does, but I do like the impact that she does have on the story and the relationship that is built up between her and Miles. Both Haley Steinfeld and Jake Johnson are perfect choices for these characters. I remember reading Jake Johnson being cast as Peter Parker, and I remember thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure on that, but hearing him actually in context of the character and where he is at his stage in his life, it makes so much sense, and I really love the direction that they have gone with both of these characters. And as I said, when it comes to the other three, they're definitely there just to kind of round out the ensemble a little bit more and just sort of show off that there is a lot more to the Spider-Verse than we have previously thought. But that doesn't mean that they're just kind of sidelined, because they do get some of the best scenes in these movies, to the point where I would argue that Spider-Man Noir was probably the biggest surprise for me. But I love the version of the character. I really love Spider-Man Noir. It is a really interesting take on Spider-Man. But the way that they go with him in this, and I was really curious to see how dark they were really going to go with him, because he is definitely one of the more violent interpretations of the character. He is really funny, and how Nicolas Cage plays him is fantastic. I think everyone was expecting Spider-Ham to be the scene stealer of this movie, but Spider-Man Noir really was a big surprise, and I really love the direction of those characters. Not that Spider-Ham doesn't have some of the best lines in the movie, absolutely, he has some fantastic scenes. I love how it is that they brought him to life in this. But for me, the biggest scene stealer was Spider-Man Noir. He was an absolutely fantastic character, and I love the direction that they have gone with him in this. I think Penny does get a little sidelined in this movie, but the one thing that I really do like is that the one thing that is so memorable about her and her big robot companion is the backstory and the art style that they've gone for with them, because it is so different from anything else in this movie. And she does get one of the more emotional sequences in this movie as well, and I really do love that. Every single one of these characters are absolutely brilliant. I think that every single one of them are just as memorable as each other, and I feel like what it is that they bring to the story, what impact that they have on Miles' origin, is really good, and it helps build his character up so much more. Obviously, this being a Spider-Man movie, there are a lot of villains that are incorporated into this, and the main threat this time around is the Kingpin. I feel like this is a really good interpretation of the Kingpin. I feel like he is definitely big and powerful. I feel like what it is that they've done with his backstory and why it is that he is doing what he's doing is very understandable. Obviously, there are a lot of other characters that are in this movie that do need to be introduced, so they don't give Kingpin too much screen time, but I think that what they do to establish his motivation and his backstory is really good, and I do like how he still feels human. But there are a lot of other villains in this movie as well, and the most prominent one being the Prowler. When it comes to the Prowler, I am definitely familiar with the character, so I was aware of the big twist concerning his identity. So I was really curious how it was that they were going to pull this off, especially with regards to how it is that he fits into Miles' origin story. And I think that how he's introduced is really good. I love seeing him going up against the Peter Parker from that world and showing that he is genuinely quite a big threat, and I love how threatening he actually is throughout this movie. And Mahershala Ali's performance really does add to that. I think that he is a fantastic choice to play this role. But I really do love how it is that they have handled the Prowler within this movie. It is different from the comic book interpretation that this is meant to be based on, but I love the angle that they've gone for. In fact, this is my favourite version of it. As I said, I knew who the Prowler was, and I knew that he is Aaron Davis, who is Miles' uncle, so I was really curious to see how it was that they were going to handle the big reveal. I wasn't really a fan of how it is handled within the comics, and even the video game I was a bit 50-50 on. This version of it fixed it for me. I really love the direction that they do go with how it is revealed and how it is handled from that point on, because there is a small section of the movie where the Prowler is not aware that Miles is this new Spider-Man, but Miles is fully aware that his uncle is the guy hunting him, and it does add to a lot of conflict. And those moments where the big reveals happen when Miles finds out about his uncle is so powerful, it is so well handled. And the moment where Miles reveals that he's the new Spider-Man to him is just fantastic. And I like that this does kind of play into one trope that is a consistent when it comes to all the other versions of Spider-Man. I really like how that is played around with, and it is twisted into something new in this one. That is something that this film does extremely well, because the writers are fully aware that by now people are familiar with Spider-Man's origin story. So they have a bit of fun playing around with the tropes in a very clever and funny way without it ever feeling like a parody. And I think my favourite is probably when Miles is bit by the spider and how he reacts to it, as well as the twist on the initial Spider-Man tragedy. The Prowler is not the most memorable Spider-Man villain, but the way that they've gone with him in this movie makes him such a good character, and I think that this is one of the best interpretations of this character. And similarly, I think this is a great interpretation of Doc Ock, who is introduced a little bit earlier on in the movie. We see just a little glimpse of her, and I love that sequence where she is properly introduced, and I love how that is built up a little bit over that sequence to the point where it is one of the best reveals of the entire movie. And it does lead to an absolutely fantastic action sequence, so I really do love this version of the character. Tombstone's got a little cameo and he's there. He doesn't really do or say that much, and I think the Scorpion's kind of okay as well. They don't really do much with either of these characters, but it is fun just getting to see them on screen. And I will admit, I really like the speech bubbles during the Scorpion scenes, because in this version he's Hispanic and most of his dialogue isn't in English. So the speech bubbles act as the subtitles and even give a little extra info as well. They even do something similar with Miles, where, like most versions of Spidey, he talks to himself. But what they do in this is they utilise text boxes in a really imaginative way to not only show what Miles is thinking, but allows him to have those conversations with himself without it feeling out of place when he needs to be stealthy. It's really good and I really like it. I'm a bit split on the Goblin in this, but I actually do like that they have him appear early on and dispatch him pretty quickly, which is a really big change for a Spider-Man series because of their tendency to rely on him. So it is a great idea making sure to do something different and not just repeat what's happened before. I really do love what it is that they have done with all these characters, the way that they're introduced, the way the performance are, the voice talent is fantastic. These are incredible actors doing the best work that they possibly can. They are incredible in each of their roles. And when it comes to the story, what it is that they are trying to do and the story that they are trying to tell is very big, very over the top and very wacky. And it would have been so easy for this movie to have just turned into an absolute mess considering just how much is going on with all these different characters that are introduced. But it's handled and balanced perfectly because they centre on Miles' origin story and his struggles. It is a very fast-paced movie as well, so there is definitely a lot of information that is thrown at you at once, but it is really balanced out very well, and I think that the story that they have gone for, the pacing, the tone that they've gone for is just right for this movie. It is perfectly done, and it is all backed up with some absolutely incredible animation. The animation in this movie is an absolute game changer with the way that it mixes all these different styles together in a really fluid way, because it mixes all the stuff that you'd normally see within like a 2D setting and then adds that into this 3D world as well. And then with all the different characters that are introduced, each one of them has a different style. Like the main three are Peter, Gwen and Miles, who all have pretty much the exact same sort of style. But then you have Spider-Ham, who's a little bit more cartoony and a little bit more out there. You have Spider-Man Noir, who's constantly in monotone with wind blowing his cloak around. And then you have Penny Parker, who is an anime character who, whenever she's jumping into her robot friend, it has like all that weird sort of colourful background whenever it does, and it's just so over the top. It's really good how it's done, and this absolutely changed how animated movies have been handled, especially more recently with movies like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish and the new Ninja Turtles movie as well. Even Disney are borrowing it. It looks like that new movie Wish that's going to be coming out this year does borrow some elements from this movie. Like Sony actually inspired Disney to do something, and it very deservingly won an Oscar as well. It is an absolutely gorgeous looking movie. I love what it is that they've done with a lot of the background effects, the way that it's sort of like this blurry sort of effect where it's all sort of out of focus like it would normally look in just a normal movie. But if you look closer, you can actually see that it's more like those comic panelled pixels. But that's just within the main universe that you see. When you actually see some of the other universes, like it's only a brief glimpse of them, the animation style changes just a little bit differently, to the point where when it goes into the Gwen universe, it's all like these watercolour paintings that looks absolutely beautiful. And the same with the Noir universe or Penny's universe. It's all fitted and stylised around those characters. You only see a little glimpse of it, but it is really good, and it helps flesh out those characters and those worlds a little bit more, and it helps you understand why it is the characters are the way they are. And because of how much detail and the amount of effort that has gone into making this movie, these movies take a lot longer to make than any other traditional animated movie, but it absolutely pays off because this is an absolutely incredible movie. Because it isn't even necessarily just a case of just the different worlds that look a little bit different, even just like the text and the opening titles, with the way that it like flicks through all these different art styles just to sort of show like the Columbia logo. It's so much detail on screen. It's just incredible. If you are somebody who has grown up reading comics, one of the things I think a lot of people will really appreciate is how they use a lot of the speech bubbles bubbles and a lot of the little bits of text boxes and all sorts throughout this film. It's really clever how it's done because it really does feel like a comic book. Because whenever characters go to a different place, one of the things that you'll see is there's like a little tag at the top of the screen saying where it is that they are. Whenever somebody does something a bit more action-packed, they do have those little action bubbles pop up on screen. Like one of my favourite ones is during the sequence at Alchemex when Peter and Miles steal a bagel, and there's like a scene where they're like running out of the cafeteria. Miles turns around, throws the bagel at somebody, it pings them on the head, and right above their head is the word bagel. It is really clever, it is so in-depth, there's so much detail on screen. I absolutely love it. But one thing they do in Miles is very clever. It is noticeable and it can be a little bit off-putting for some people, and I do understand why that is, but I think that it is really clever what it is that they've done. And that's that his movements are kind of stilted a little bit with the way that his frame rate, the frame rate that the traditional movie is played at is 24 frames a second. That's the amount of frames is needed, how many pictures are needed in order to make a image look as though it's moving. With Miles, I think it's 12 frames a second because they sort of jump a frame or two to make him sort of look like he's sort of like stilted as he's moving. It's really subtle how it's done, and it's used to kind of play up to the fact that he's not really quite sure of what it is that he's doing, that he's not as comfortable doing all the stuff that he's needing to do in this movie. And it is really clever how it is handled, because as he grows in confidence, his frame rate changes into 24 frames per second as a sort of way to show that. It's so subtle, but it is so good, and it does add a very good, unique visual style to this movie that we've never seen before. But a lot of movies recently, as I said, Puss in Boots and Ninja Turtles, have definitely borrowed from. It does take some getting used to. I definitely did find it a bit strange seeing this for the first time, but you do get used to it and you do really start to warm up to it over the course of the film. And it's actually quite a clever thing, because one thing that a lot of people have mentioned is that you could pause this movie at any time and it would look like a work of art. It is a absolutely fantastic looking poster or portrait. You could pause it on any frame and you would get the exact same response. This is also one of the very rare comic book movies that has actually used comic book panels and framing to do a few of their sequences with the way that some of the characters might be doing something, so it sort of shows them at different angles or shows different things going off at the same time. The only other movie I can think of that actually did that was Ang Lee's Hulk, and that didn't work very well because it was absolutely pointless. But this is used very well, and I think that how it is staged and how it does play out is incredible. It's so well done. I genuinely love this movie and what it is that they are able to do. The style that they have gone with for this movie, the stuff that they are able to do in this movie, you cannot do in live action. I think that is one of the biggest benefits of having an animated movie like this. The action is also amazing and takes full advantage of the visual style. It's very fast and energetic, and it's incredibly well choreographed, and how they use each character's powers is really imaginative, especially during the finale where the normal backdrop is switched up for an increasingly trippy sequence where buildings, trains and more are swirling around the collider and the colours start shifting from bright multicolours to just red and black. It is an incredible sequence, and it's one scene that I love rewatching. They also balance the comedy and drama in these scenes very well too, because they mostly maintain a sense of fun and use lots of visual slapstick, but it can get a bit more violent, intense and darker, especially early on in the movie, as well as the final fight with the Kingpin. It really helps keep this fresh and unpredictable and makes for some of the best Spider-Man oriented action sequences ever created. I will admit I was definitely a little bit iffy on some of the looks of these characters. Like, some of them are very extreme, like they aren't exactly what you would normally see in either the comic books or even the animated shows, because they do feel very different from what we have seen before. The biggest ones being things like the Goblin or Kingpin, who do look very extreme, but I do like the design choices that they have gone for, because it does separate it from what we have seen before, and it does suit the tone that these movies have gone for, especially the looks that they've gone for with Miles and the Prowler, because like the Miles costume I do think it is a really good costume, but I think the way that his costume is handled in this movie and what it's meant to represent is really good, because it is meant to kind of show that he is growing into being Spider-Man. So he is using Peter Parker's old costume and he's just sprayed it black with the little spider logo on his chest. It's a really great interpretation of that costume, and I really love that that is what they did. It is an incredible decision for them to have done. But as I said, the Prowler in this movie is a really intense character, and I think that what they have done with him is really good, and his design is actually quite scary, and I do think that it really does add a lot to his presence in this movie, just the big cape that he has and the claws that look quite nasty and dangerous. I do think that with the overall design of this movie, with the city, with the characters, everything, it really does look good, and it does separate this movie from other animated movies. This does have a very unique identity, and it definitely helps that the people who worked on things like the Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street are working on this movie, because they do have a very specific style of comedy and storytelling that they do, and it really works very well for this movie, because this is a very funny movie. Arguably, I think this is one of the funniest Spider-Man movies that's ever been made, and I think that the style of comedy that they've gone for is very fast. It is so quick, because there are so many jokes that are just thrown at you that you will miss, and it does take a few viewings for you to really sort of catch them all. As I said, like the bagel joke, it took me a few times to actually spot, because it's that subtle, but it's there, it's in the background, it's so good. The dialogue and the way the performances are is fast, but again, it's stuff that you do pick up on over time. It is so good. It is a very, very funny movie, but it has a lot of heart as well. The way that they handle the characters do feel very relatable. The way that the story is paced out, the way that the story, the origins is all weaved together is incredibly well done. You will laugh, you will cry, you will be in tears one way or another watching this movie, and I will fully admit there are multiple scenes where I did tear up because of how well it is handled. I was very invested in this movie and the story and decisions that they were taking across this film, like how it is that Spider-Man is killed off early on in the movie. The Peter Parker of that world is killed off. How that is played out. I thought they were going to play it up for laughs with just the dramatic music, but then I realised that no, they are taking this very seriously, and it is a genuinely upsetting sequence. I will definitely admit that I think that that was definitely heightened because this was the year that Stan Lee had passed away, so I think that that was still quite fresh with a lot of people, and Stan Lee does have a little cameo in that moment as well, so I do think that definitely does have a bit more of an impact on that moment. But I really do appreciate that they do take the time to have those dark and more emotional and more complicated moments, because it really does separate this movie from other films that are primarily about just trying to make you laugh. It does make you root for these characters and understand what it is that they are trying to do. And the way that Miles' story is built up across the movie, all the way up to the moment that he becomes Spider-Man, the leap of faith moment with that song, those visuals of him rising up towards the city, of that swing across the city, it really did make me tear up. I'm tearing up now a little bit just thinking about it. It is such a good moment. It is a perfect payoff to everything that had happened up until that point in time. It is such a satisfying scene as well. You cannot help but get emotional watching that moment. It is so well executed, and how it is built up is flawless. But I don't think it's just the visuals that make this movie as good as it is. I think the sound design really does deserve a lot of credit as well, because the stuff that they do with the sound is fantastic. It does add to the different styles of these characters with the way that they all have their own little styles and sound effects, which does sort of add to their characters a little bit more, and you see a little bit of where it is that they come from, with the way that Penny's is very techno heavy and over the top. You have Spider-Ham, who has all the very cartoon sound effects, all like the anvils and hammers and all sorts, which does give you the impression of a cartoon. How the sound is played out throughout the movie as well, and how it does sort of help enhance a lot of these sequences, it really is incredible, and it is very in-depth. I really love how it is used throughout the film, and the way that it works in tandem with the music is quite good as well, because there are definitely some parts of this where I was wondering, is that part of the sound effects or is that part of the music, because it does blur together very well. And I am quite surprised actually listening to the soundtrack on its own, because those little bits are there, and it does help enhance that a little bit more, and I think that you cannot have this movie without those sound effects. And I've got to briefly mention the music in this movie. The score composed by Daniel Pemberton is incredible. It really does fit this movie very well. It does enhance a lot of the sequences that it is used in. It is used in most of the sequences in this movie, but it really does work very well. I like how every character does have their own little theme, especially when they are introduced in their own little montage sequences. They all have some sort of specific style and sound to them, but the main theme themes of this movie, the ones that are there to establish the more emotional stuff with Miles, is really good and it is very memorable. And I will admit, it does add to the intensity of a lot of these sequences as well, and it does sort of play into those more action-packed moments very well, and I think it is really great overall. It's not my favourite Spider-Man soundtrack overall, but I do think that it is a very important part of this movie, and that does include the songs. The songs, I will admit, are not really my thing, but I do think that where they're used, what songs that they have chosen to be in this movie and how they are used is very good, and I think that the songs do become more memorable because of it. Things like Sunflower and What's Up Danger, I think that songs on their own, not really my favourites, but I do think that how they are used within the movie is really good, and I cannot think of those sequences without those songs in them. This is genuinely a great score, and I do think that the movie would be a lot less without it. One thing that I really do like in this movie is the theme for the Prowler, because it really does feel quite intense and quite scary. It does add to the intensity of those moments with him. It does remind me a lot of the Winter Soldier soundtrack, but it does sound different from it. It does sound very distinct, and I do like what it adds to the character. I could spend all day going over all the little references and Easter eggs that are featured in this movie, but I won't go over that with you because there's just too much to talk about. There are so many little references and bits of detail that are added into this. It's so in-depth. This is an absolute love letter to everything Spider-Man. If you are a Spider-Man fan and you have not seen this movie, please watch it. I'll also admit, and it's not just me who said this, but there is a moment during the final battle sequence which, especially because the Kingpin is involved in it, it does feel like there is actually a little Easter egg to the Daredevil Netflix show. I don't know if that is officially the case, but it is there. It is very visually similar to it, so I don't know if that officially is an Easter egg or not, but it is cool seeing it. Overall, this is an absolutely flawless film. It is one of my all-time favourite animated films. All the biggest aspects of this movie, the story, the characters, the design, the animation style, everything about it is genuinely brilliant, and even when it comes to all the smaller, subtler details, they are expertly done. There is definitely a lot of fan service that is incorporated into this movie, but I think that how it is handled does fit very naturally into what it is that they are trying to do. And speaking as a fan, I genuinely don't mind that stuff as long as it is handled well, and I think that it is handled very well in this movie. It is very in-depth, and I really did enjoy it a lot more because of it. As I said, this is not only one of the best Spider-Man movies that's ever been made, it's one of the best comic book movies that's ever been made, it's one of the best animated movies that's ever been made. It is an absolute must-watch movie for fans and casual audiences alike. I understand that the animation style is definitely a bit extreme and it can be a bit off-putting for some people, but trust me, please just stick with it and you will have a great time with this. I promise you will. This is an absolutely incredible movie, and because of that, my rating for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a 10 out of 10. I absolutely adore this movie, and I absolutely encourage you to watch this movie if you've never seen it before. Well, I think I've gone on long enough for this one, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you're enjoying this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have seen Into the Spider-Verse, let me know down in the comments what you think about it and where would you rank it with regards to the Spider-Man movies. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like me to do, let me know. I am going to get around to reviewing Across the Spider-Verse, so expect that video out very soon, because believe me, I really want to talk about it. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.